In the heart of America's Rust Belt, where dreams often fade like old paint under the Midwest sun, Jack Miller's weathered hands still bring classic cars back to life. His garage, a cathedral of chrome and memories, has seen better days, just like the 1965 Mustang GT that now sits in his bay, its once gleaming red finish dulled by decades of neglect. At 72, Jack knows every ding tells a story, every scratch holds a secret. What he doesn't know is that this particular Mustang belongs to Claire Richardson, a self-made billionaire who spent her life building an empire but never found a love worth more than her bank account. This isn't just another restoration project. It's about to become the story of how two hearts, as classic as the cars themselves, discover that sometimes the most valuable things can't be measured in dollars or horsepower. The morning sun hadn't quite crested the horizon when Jack Miller's alarm buzzed to life. He didn't need it anymore. Hadn't for years. But Sarah had always set it for 5:30, and some habits were too precious to break. His fingers brushed against the worn gold band on his left hand as he switched off the alarm, a morning ritual as familiar as breathing. The small craftsman house on Cedar Street looked exactly as it had when they'd bought it 43 years ago, right down to the slightly crooked mailbox that Sarah had insisted gave it character. Inside, time had moved more slowly than the world outside, preserving their life together like amber. Jack moved through his morning routine with practiced precision. Coffee first, always coffee. The machine was new, a gift from Tommy, his young apprentice who worried too much about the ancient percolator Jack had used since '82. The rich aroma filled the kitchen as he stood at the window, watching the sky transform from purple to pink to gold. The wedding ring caught the first ray of sunlight, sending a familiar ache through his chest. He'd stopped apologizing to Sarah's photo on the mantel for still wearing it. "You'd probably give me hell for it," he murmured to the empty room, a slight smile tugging at his weathered features. "But then, you always did have opinions about everything." The sound of a car door slamming broke through his reverie. Tommy was early again. The kid had shown up at the garage 2 years ago, more interested in engines than his high school classes, and somehow never left. Jack couldn't complain. The boy had a natural talent that reminded him of himself at that age, and his enthusiasm made the old garage feel alive again. "Morning, Mr. Miller." Tommy's voice carried through the screen door, followed by the smell of fresh donuts. "Thought you might want breakfast before we tackle that Mustang." Jack opened the door, accepting the paper bag with a gruff nod that didn't quite hide his affection. "You're gonna make me fat, kid." "Nah, you burn it all off crawling under cars anyway." Tommy followed him into the kitchen, already talking about the day ahead. "Did you see the custom work on that GT's undercarriage?" "Never seen anything like it. Bet there's a story there." "There's always a story," Jack replied, pouring a second cup of coffee for Tommy. The boy took it black now, trying to mirror Jack's habits in ways that both amused and touched him. "But cars don't give up their secrets until they're ready." They ate in comfortable silence, watching the town of Miller's Bend wake up outside the kitchen window. The garage's sign was visible from here, Miller's Classic Restorations, spelled out in faded red letters against weathered metal. It had been there so long it was practically a landmark, guiding people home just like the church steeple on Main Street. "You know," Tommy said, brushing donut sugar from his hands, "people are talking about the Mustang." "Word gets around when something that special shows up in town," Jack snorted. "People in this town talk about everything." "Yeah, but this is different. Mary at the diner says her cousin in Detroit knows someone who knows someone." Tommy's voice trailed off at Jack's raised eyebrow. "Well, anyway, they say the owner's someone important." "They're all important, kid." Jack stood, rinsing his coffee cup. "Every car that comes through that garage matters to someone. That's why we do things right." Tommy nodded, but Jack could see the questions burning in his young apprentice's eyes. The boy had good instincts. The Mustang was special. Jack had felt it the moment it was delivered, wrapped in an expensive car cover, with nothing but a cashier's check and typed instructions. No signature, no personal contact, just specifications for a full restoration and a timeline that suggested money was no object. "Come on," Jack said, grabbing his keys from the hook by the door. The same hook where Sarah's keys still hung, untouched for 3 years. "And that Mustang isn't going to restore itself." As they walked the 3 blocks to the garage, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this project was different. Maybe it was the mysterious circumstances, or maybe it was just that the car reminded him of simpler times when he and Sarah would drive for hours in their own Mustang, planning a future that seemed as wide open as the Michigan sky. The ring on his finger caught the morning light again, and this time the ache felt a little different. Like maybe, just maybe, it was time for a new chapter in the story. The Mustang sat in the morning light like a sleeping giant, its faded red paint telling stories of decades past. Jack circled it slowly, his trained eye catching details others might miss. Tommy followed, notepad in hand, already cataloguing what they'd need. "Look at these custom modifications," Jack murmured, crouching despite his protesting knees. "Someone really loved this car." His fingers traced the subtle alterations to the undercarriage, changes that wouldn't be visible to the casual observer, but spoke volumes to someone who knew what to look for. Tommy leaned in, squinting. "Those aren't factory standard." "Not even close." Jack straightened up, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "These are racing mods, but done so carefully you'd never know unless you were looking. Whoever did this work," he paused, appreciating the craftsmanship. "They knew exactly what they were doing." The car's title document lay on his workbench, crisp and official, but something about it caught Jack's eye. He picked it up, studying the previous owner's signature. "Richardson Enterprises," he read aloud. "Corporate ownership." "Maybe it's some executive's toy?" Tommy suggested, but Jack shook his head. "No, there's too much history here. This car wasn't just some status symbol." He opened the driver's door, the hinges creaking in protest. The interior smelled of aged leather and memories, that distinct scent that classic cars develop over decades of life. The phone rang, echoing through. The garage. Tommy jogged over to answer it while Jack continued his inspection, running his hands along the steering wheel, feeling the worn spots where countless hands had gripped it before. "Mr. Miller?" Tommy called, covering the receiver. "It's someone about the Mustang. Says they're Ms. Richardson's assistant." Jack took the phone, his curiosity piqued. "Jack Miller speaking." "Mr. Miller," a crisp, professional voice responded. "I'm calling on behalf of Miss Richardson regarding the '65 Mustang GT. She wanted me to ensure you have everything you need for the restoration." "The specs were quite detailed," Jack replied, glancing at the thick envelope of restoration instructions. "Though I do have some questions about the custom work." A pause on the line. "Custom work?" "The racing modifications. They're exceptional. Probably done in the late '60s, if I had to guess. Most people wouldn't notice them, but they're part of this car's history. I assumed Ms. Richardson would want them preserved." Another pause. Longer this time. When the voice returned, it carried a hint of something new. Respect, maybe. "I'll need to consult with Ms. Richardson about this. She may want to discuss the modifications with you personally." After hanging up, Jack returned to the Mustang, where Tommy was examining the trunk. "Hey, Mr. Miller, look at this." Young man pointed to a small compartment built into the trunk's interior panel. "Never seen anything like it." Jack leaned in, his interest deepening. The compartment was masterfully crafted, invisible unless you knew where to look. Inside they found a folded piece of paper yellowed with age. Jack carefully unfolded it. A receipt from a performance shop in Detroit, dated 1968. "Racing parts," he muttered, scanning the list. "High-end stuff for the time." At the bottom, a handwritten note. "For Claire, because dreams should be fast. Love, Dad." Tommy whistled low. "So it's a family car." "More than that," Jack said, carefully refolding the receipt and returning it to its hiding place. "It's a father's gift to his daughter." He closed the trunk gently, newfound understanding, changing how he saw the car. This wasn't just another restoration project, this was someone's cherished memory, a piece of their history. The morning light streamed through the garage windows, dust motes dancing in the beams. Jack could feel the story here, waiting to be uncovered like the car's original paint beneath years of wear. Someone named Claire had once treasured this car, had raced it perhaps, keeping the modifications secret like a shared confidence between father and daughter. "Tommy," he said, rolling up his sleeves, "get the assessment forms. We're going to do this one differently." Different how? Jack ran his hand along the Mustang's fender, feeling the ghost of its former glory. "We're not just restoring a car, we're restoring a memory." As they began their detailed assessment, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this project would be more than just another job. The mystery of Claire Richardson and her father's gift was already beginning to weave itself into his daily thoughts, adding a new dimension to the familiar rhythm of restoration work. The phone call from the assistant, the hidden compartment, the receipt, each piece added to a puzzle that Jack found himself increasingly eager to solve. After all, every car told a story, but some stories had the power to change the lives of those who uncovered them. The search for original Mustang parts led Jack to the storage room above his garage, a space that hadn't seen much activity since Sarah's passing. Dust motes swirled in the afternoon light as he pushed open the heavy door, the familiar scent of old leather and motor oil mixing with memories. "Need any help up there?" Tommy called from below. "I know where everything is," Jack replied, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true anymore. Sarah had been the organized one, keeping meticulous records of their parts inventory. Her system probably still made sense if he could just remember how she'd explained it. A stack of boxes caught his eye, labeled in Sarah's neat handwriting. "Summer '85, car show season." Inside, beneath a layer of bubble wrap, he found her old Polaroid camera still loaded with undeveloped film. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted it out. Sarah had been everywhere with that camera during their restoration projects, documenting every step. "For posterity," she'd always say, snapping pictures when he least expected it. "Found anything?" Tommy's footsteps creaked on the stairs. Jack quickly wiped his eyes. "Maybe. Help me with these boxes." As they sorted through the parts, the camera sat on a nearby workbench, its presence like a ghost in the room. Tommy noticed Jack's occasional glances toward it, but knew better than to ask. 3 years wasn't long enough to make some conversations. "Easy." "Mr. Miller," Tommy said, breaking the heavy silence, "I found something weird in the Mustang's trunk while you were up here." Jack welcomed the distraction. "Weird how?" "There's another hidden compartment, smaller than the first one, but this one's got something in it." Tommy pulled a small object from his pocket, a key, ancient and ornate, unlike anything that would fit a car. Jack took it, examining the intricate patterns. "Where exactly did you find this?" "Behind the spare tire mount. There's a panel that looks factory standard, but it's been modified." Tommy's eyes lit up with the excitement of discovery. Someone went to a lot of trouble to hide this. The afternoon light caught the key's brass surface, revealing an engraving. "Richardson Estate, 1968, the same year as the receipt they'd found earlier." "The plot thickens," Jack murmured, pocketing the key. He'd add it to their growing collection of mysteries surrounding this car and its enigmatic owner. Back downstairs, the Mustang waited patiently in the bay, its secrets slowly unraveling. Jack found himself studying it with new eyes, wondering what other stories it held within its steel frame. The Polaroid camera made its way downstairs too, though Jack couldn't quite say why he'd brought it. He placed it on his workbench, next to the key and the growing folder of notes about the car's restoration. "You know," Tommy said, watching Jack arrange these items, "my mum used to say that old things find their way back to us when we need them most." Jack glanced at his young apprentice, surprised by the wisdom in those words. "Your mother sounds like a smart woman." "She is," Tommy hesitated, then added, "She also says it's okay to let new things in, that it doesn't mean you're forgetting the old ones." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Jack busied himself with the Mustang's engine compartment, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting, like gears changing in an old transmission. The phone rang again. Claire Richardson's assistant, no doubt. But this time, when Jack answered, the voice on the other end was different, softer, less professional, with a hint of emotion that caught him off guard. "Mr. Miller, this is Claire Richardson." Jack's hand tightened on the receiver. "Ms. Richardson, we were just discovering some interesting features in your Mustang." "The key," she said. "You found it, didn't you?" "We did." A long pause filled the line. "That key, it opens more than just a lock, Mr. Miller. It opens a story I haven't been ready to tell for a very long time." Jack looked at the Polaroid camera on his workbench, understanding something about unopened doors and undeveloped memories. "Sometimes," he said, "the hardest parts of our stories are the ones we need to share the most." "Yes," Claire replied softly. "Yes, I suppose they are." After hanging up, Jack stood in the fading afternoon light, surrounded by pieces of the past. Both his and Claire's. The Mustang seemed to watch him, its chrome catching the sun's last rays, waiting for its story to be told. Tommy worked quietly nearby, respecting the weight of the moment. Above them, in the storage room, boxes of memories waited to be rediscovered, each one a piece of a life built around love and cars and the simple joy of bringing beauty back to broken things. The next morning brought a gentle rain to Miller's Bend, drumming softly on the garage's roof as Jack began his daily inspection of the Mustang. The car was slowly revealing itself to him, each day offering new insights into its history. He started with the glove box, which had been stuck shut since the car's arrival. After carefully working the mechanism loose, he found what appeared to be decades of accumulated paperwork, old registration cards, maintenance records, and beneath them all, a yellowed envelope. The paper was high quality, the kind you don't find at ordinary stationers. Jack recognized the Richardson estate letterhead from the key they'd found yesterday. His fingers hesitated over the seal. Reading personal correspondence felt like crossing a line. "Morning, Mr. Miller." Tommy's voice echoed through the garage, accompanied by the squeak of wet shoes on concrete. "Brought you some... what's that?" Jack held up the envelope. "Found it in the glove box. Probably should wait for Miss Richardson's permission before..." The phone rang, as if on cue. Tommy answered it, then held out the receiver with a knowing smile. "Miss Richardson for you." "Mr. Miller." Claire's voice was warm despite the early hour. "I trust you found the letter." Jack blinked in surprise. "Just now, actually. How did you..." "I've been tracking the restoration progress through your detailed notes. I knew the glove box would be today's task." She paused. "That letter, it's why I chose your garage, Mr. Miller. Your reputation for treating cars like more than just machines. Please, read it. It's important that you understand." After hanging up, Jack carefully opened the envelope. The letter inside was written in a strong hand, the ink slightly faded with time. "Dearest father, by the time you read this, I'll be on my way to business school against your wishes. I'm leaving the Mustang in your garage. Not because I don't love it, but because I love it too much to take it where I'm going. You built this car to teach me about beauty, about precision, about the joy of creating something perfect. But you also taught me about determination, about following my dreams, even when they lead down unexpected roads. Every modification we made together, every secret racing victory, every midnight lesson about engines and life, they're all part of who I am. But I need to build something of my own now, something that doesn't run on gasoline and doesn't fit in a garage. I'll come back for the car someday, when I've proven that a woman can build an empire as solid as any engine block. Until then, keep it safe for me. All my love, Claire." Jack read the letter twice, then carefully folded it back into its envelope. The rain continued its gentle rhythm on the roof, but the garage felt different somehow, as if the Mustang's presence had taken on new meaning. Tommy, who had been pretending to organize tools nearby, couldn't contain his curiosity any longer. "What did it say?" "It's a daughter's goodbye," Jack replied softly, "and a promise." He walked over to the Mustang, seeing it with new eyes. Every modification they'd discovered wasn't just about performance. It was about rebellion, about a young woman proving herself in a world that didn't expect her to succeed. The phone rang again, and this time Jack wasn't surprised to hear Claire's voice. "Did you read it?" she asked. "Yes." "Then you understand why this isn't just another restoration." Jack thought about Sarah, about all the times she'd stood up to customers who doubted her knowledge of cars, about the strength it took to be a woman in their world. "I understand perfectly, Ms. Richardson." "Claire," she corrected gently. "I think, after sharing that letter, you should call me Claire." After they hung up, Jack shared the letter's story with Tommy, watching comprehension dawn on the young man's face. "So she built an empire," Tommy mused, "just like she promised her dad. And now she's coming back for the car," Jack added, "just like she promised too." They worked in thoughtful silence for a while, each small repair taking on new significance. This wasn't just about restoring a car anymore. It was about honoring a journey, about understanding the courage it takes to chase a dream. The rain eventually stopped, but its music lingered in Jack's mind, mixing with the echo of Claire's words and the steady rhythm of restoration work. Some days were about fixing engines, others were about mending stories. Today, somehow, was about both. The letter changed everything about how Jack approached the Mustang's restoration. Each part he touched now carried the weight of Claire's story, her determination echoing in every modification he uncovered. That afternoon, as he carefully removed the dashboard for refinishing, something metallic clinked to the floor. Tommy, working nearby, reached for it first. "Dog tags?" The young man held up the tarnished metal, squinting at the engraving. "Lieutenant James Richardson, USAF." Jack took them carefully, noting the dates of service. "Korea. Her father was a pilot before he got into cars." The tags were attached to a faded ribbon, carefully wound and tucked behind the dash where no one would think to look. Tommy watched as Jack examined the tags. "Another secret." "No," Jack said softly. "More like a guardian angel. Pilots are superstitious folk. Bet he put these here to watch over her when she raced." Claire's assistant called shortly after, but this time Jack interrupted the formal greeting. "Tell Miss Richardson we found her father's dog tags." A long pause, then Claire's voice came on the line, all pretense of professional distance gone. "Behind the dash?" "Yes, they've been keeping watch all these years." He heard her take a shaky breath. "Daddy always said, he said the car would take care of me, even when he couldn't." "He built it like a fortress," Jack replied. "Every modification was about making it faster, yes, but also safer. He wasn't just teaching you to race, he was teaching you to survive." "You understand," Claire said, wonder in her voice. "You really understand." In town, rumors were starting to circulate about the mysterious Mustang and its owner. Tommy reported snippets of conversation from the diner, the auto parts store, the coffee shop, where the retired mechanics gathered to swap stories. "They're saying she's some kind of celebrity," Tommy told Jack as they worked, "or maybe royalty in hiding." Jack snorted. "People always want mysteries to be bigger than they are. Sometimes the real story is enough." But he knew the truth was spreading. Mary from the diner had a cousin who worked in Detroit's financial district. Someone else knew someone who'd seen Claire Richardson's name in Forbes. The small-town grapevine was buzzing with half-truths and speculation. That evening, as Jack cleaned the dog tags with the same gentle care he used on the car's most delicate parts, he thought about fathers and daughters, about legacy and love. He thought about Sarah, who'd understood engines as well as any man, but had to prove herself every day. The phone rang one last time as he was closing up. Claire again, her voice tired but warm. "Keep them safe for me?" she asked. "The tags, I mean, until you're ready." Jack finished. Just like the car. Just like the car, she echoed, though I'm beginning to think maybe I've been ready for a while now. Maybe I just needed the right person to help me remember. After hanging up, Jack placed the dog tags carefully on his workbench next to Sarah's Polaroid camera, two pieces of different stories somehow finding their way together in his garage. Tommy, finishing his cleanup, watched the careful placement. You know what my mom would say about this? What's that, kid? She'd say sometimes people come into our lives right when we need them, even if we don't know we need them yet. Jack looked at his young apprentice, surprised again by his perception. Your mother's getting quite a lot of mileage out of her wisdom these days. Tommy grinned. She's got a whole book of it, says she's saving some for special occasions. As they locked up for the night, Jack couldn't help but notice how the Mustang's curves caught the evening light, its partially restored surface a patchwork, of old and new, much like the stories unfolding around it. The dog tags would join the growing collection of artifacts. The key, the letter, the receipt, each piece telling part of a story that was becoming more fascinating, more personal, with each passing day. Tomorrow they would continue the restoration, but now every turn of the wrench felt like turning pages in a book he couldn't put down. While sorting through old invoices, Jack found it, the receipt from his first job at the original Miller's garage, dated 1968, the same year as Claire's Mustang. The paper was worn soft at the creases, his father's handwriting still clear. After all these years, oil change and tune-up, $12.50. Prices have changed a bit, he muttered to himself, comparing it to the modern invoices on his desk. The old receipt brought back memories of learning at his father's side, just as he now taught Tommy. The evening stretched long and quiet, Tommy having left hours ago. Jack often stayed late, enjoying the peace of the garage after hours. Tonight, though, something felt different. The air held an expectancy, like the moment before a storm breaks. The soft purr of an expensive engine drew his attention. Through the garage's windows, he saw a sleek black car pull up, its headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. A woman emerged, elegant silver-streaked hair caught in the security lights. Jack's heart skipped. He knew, without being told, that this was Claire Richardson. She stood for a long moment just looking at the garage, at her father's Mustang visible through the open bay doors. Jack stayed where he was, instinctively understanding that she needed this moment alone. Finally, she approached the Mustang, her hand trailing along its partially restored surface. Her fingers found the spots where her father had modified the car, unerringly, as if she'd never forgotten. "Hello, old friend," she whispered, unaware of Jack's presence. He cleared his throat gently, not wanting to startle her. "She remembers. You." Claire turned, composing herself with practiced grace. "Mr. Miller, I apologize for the late visit." "Jack," he corrected, echoing her earlier insistence on first names. "And no apology needed. Sometimes nighttime is when cars speak the clearest." A smile touched her lips, genuine despite the tears in her eyes. "Daddy used to say the same thing. We'd work on her till dawn sometimes, just listening to what she needed." Jack moved closer, noting how Claire's professional facade softened when she talked about the car. Here was the young woman from the letter, the one who'd raced in secret and dreamed of building an empire. "You've done beautiful work," she said, examining the restoration's progress. Her fingers traced the spot where they'd found her father's dog tags. "You understand her." "I understand what she means to you," Jack replied. The distinction felt important somehow. Claire nodded, then reached into her purse and withdrew a small leather portfolio. Inside was a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. "Tommy sent me this today. Said he found it while researching the car's history." Jack took the article, dated 1969. The headline read, "Mystery Driver Dominates Local Circuit." Below was a blurry photo of the Mustang crossing a finish line, its driver's identity concealed by a racing helmet. "That was you? Every weekend for 2 years." Claire smiled at the memory. "Daddy would enter me as J. Richardson. Everyone assumed I was his son, until they found out the truth. Until I left for business school." She took the clipping back, touching the photo gently. "Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice." "You built your empire," Jack said, "just like you promised." "Yes." Claire looked around the garage, taking in the tools, the parts, the organized chaos of restoration work. "But standing here, smelling the oil and leather, it feels like coming home." Jack understood. Every morning when he opened the garage, he felt the same way. Some places held more than memories. They held pieces of your soul. The night deepened around them as they talked, sharing stories of engines and dreams, of fathers who taught through cars, of the peculiar magic of bringing all things back to life. When Claire finally left, the garage felt different, as if her presence had awakened something long dormant. Tommy would be full of questions tomorrow, Jack knew. The kid's instincts about Claire had been right from the start. But for now, Jack sat with the old receipt from his father's garage, thinking about legacy and choice, about the roads we take and the ones we leave behind. The Mustang seemed to glow in the security lights, its partially restored surface a testament to second chances. Tomorrow, they would continue the work of bringing it back to life. But tonight, Jack realized, they'd begun restoring something else, something that couldn't be measured in horsepower or chrome. Morning light streamed through the garage windows as Jack faced the Mustang's most challenging repair yet. The custom intake manifold needed precise adjustment, the kind of delicate work that required perfect touch and years of experience. "Hand me the 916 wrench," he called to Tommy, "the red-handled one." Tommy hesitated. "Sarah's wrench?" Jack nodded. He hadn't touched it since she passed. It had hung on her pegboard, untouched like a shrine. But today felt different. She'd wanted used on something special, he said softly, more to himself than Tommy. The wrench was perfectly balanced, its handle worn smooth from years of Sarah's grip. She'd used it on every significant restoration they'd ever done together, claiming it was lucky. "Tools have memories," she'd always say. "They remember every job, every triumph." As Jack worked, he could almost feel Sarah's presence guiding his hands. The manifold adjustment went perfectly, each component settling into place with satisfying precision. "She's purring now," Tommy observed as they tested the engine. "Like she knows she's getting closer to being whole again." The phone rang, Claire's daily check-in. But this time, when Jack answered, her voice held a new urgency. "I'm coming to see her today," she announced. "The board meeting finished early and I need to see her progress in person." Jack looked around the garage, suddenly aware of every speck of dust, every tool out of place. "We'll be ready." "Jack," Claire's voice softened. "Thank you for using Sarah's wrench. Tommy told me what it means." He shot his apprentice a look but couldn't muster any real annoyance. "Some jobs require a special touch." "I know." There was a smile in her voice. "I'll be there in an hour." After hanging up, Jack and Tommy worked in companionable silence, preparing the garage for Claire's visit. The Mustang gleamed under the lights, its restoration now more than halfway complete. "You know what today is?" Tommy asked suddenly. Jack paused in his cleaning. "Thursday. It's exactly 1 month since the Mustang arrived." Tommy grinned. "Feels like longer, doesn't it?" It did. In just 4 weeks, the car had become more than a project. It had become a bridge between past and present, between loss and possibility. Claire arrived precisely on schedule, but this time she wasn't alone. A distinguished older man accompanied her, his bearing military despite his business suit. "Jack, this is Thomas Chen, my father's oldest friend," Claire introduced. "He was there when Daddy first modified the Mustang." Thomas stepped forward, his handshake firm. "James would be proud of what you're doing here. He always said cars have souls." "That they do," Jack agreed, leading them to the Mustang. As Claire and Thomas examined the restoration work, Jack found himself watching Claire's face. Every detail they'd preserved, every modification they'd restored, brought a new light to her eyes. When they reached the engine bay, she gasped softly. "The intake manifold, it's perfect. Exactly how Daddy had it." "Sarah's wrench," Jack said simply. Claire turned to him, really looked at him, as if seeing something new. "Will you tell me about her sometime? About Sarah?" The question caught him off guard, but not unpleasantly. "I'd like that." Thomas watched this exchange with knowing eyes. Later, as Claire made some calls outside, he lingered by the workbench. "You know," he said casually, "Claire's never let anyone else touch this car, not in all these years." Jack absorbed this information, feeling its weight. "I'll take good care of it." "I think," Thomas smiled, "you already are. And not just the car." As they prepared to leave, Claire paused by Sarah's pegboard, looking at the red-handled wrench now restored to its place of honor. "Tools have memories," she said softly. Jack's heart skipped. That's what Sarah always said. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, understanding, recognition, possibility. Tommy, watching from across the garage, smiled to himself and quietly began closing up for the day. The Mustang sat in its bay, sunset painting it in shades of promise, as if it too understood that its restoration was becoming about more than just metal and chrome. Sarah's wrench hung on its pegboard, its well-worn handle catching the last light, a bridge between what was and what could be. The magazine arrived with Tommy's morning coffee run, rolled up and clutched tight in his nervous hands. "Mr. Miller, I think you need to see this." Jack looked up from the Mustang's carburetor, noting the unusual tension in his apprentice's voice. Tommy unrolled the latest issue of Fortune, revealing Claire Richardson on the cover. She stood in a corporate boardroom, power and confidence radiating from her pose. The headline read, "The Queen of Clean Energy, How Claire Richardson Transformed." "American industry. 30 billion, Tommy said quietly. "That's what the article says her company's worth." Jack stared at the photo. Claire's eyes held the same determination he'd seen in the garage, but here it was wrapped in corporate armor. The article lay between them like a revelation, changing everything and nothing at once. "Did you know?" Tommy asked. "Not the details." Jack picked up the magazine, studying it more closely. "But I knew she'd kept her promise to build something big." The article painted a picture of Claire that both matched and contradicted the woman he'd come to know. It spoke of hostile takeovers and ruthless business strategies, of revolutionary patents and environmental crusades. But it also mentioned a mysterious classic car collection and a passion for engineering that she'd inherited from her father. "There's more," Tommy said, pulling out his phone. "Once I found this, I started digging. She's everywhere. Forbes, Wall Street Journal, Time. She's one of the most powerful women in American business." Jack thought about Claire in his garage, her fingers trailing lovingly over her father's modifications. The billionaire CEO had been there all along, but so had the daughter who'd raced in secret and left heartfelt letters in glove boxes. The phone rang, right on schedule. Jack answered, knowing this conversation would be different. "You've seen it," Claire said. It wasn't a question. Tommy brought in the Fortune piece. A long pause. "I was going to tell you." "When?" "When? I was sure you saw me and not my bank account." Her voice carried a weight he hadn't heard before. "Most people, when they find out, everything changes." Jack looked at the Mustang, at all the work they'd done together. "You're still the girl who raced under her father's name. The money doesn't change that." He heard her soft exhale. Relief, evident even through the phone. "I'm coming by today. We should talk." "We should," he agreed. After hanging up, he found Tommy watching him expectantly. Well, what?" "She's a billionaire, Mr. Miller. A real-life billionaire who's been hanging around our garage like it's normal." Jack picked up Sarah's wrench, its familiar weight grounding him. "Because here, she gets to be normal, gets to be the person she was before the money." Tommy considered this, his young face thoughtful. "Is that why she chose us? Some small-town garage instead of some fancy restoration shop? Maybe." Jack smiled slightly. "Or maybe some stories just find their way home." Claire arrived in the late afternoon, dressed more casually than her magazine cover, but carrying herself with the same quiet confidence. She saw the magazine on Jack's workbench and stopped. "I thought about buying every copy in town," she admitted. "Old habit, trying to control the narrative." "Small towns," Jack replied. "News would have gotten out anyway, and now that it is." He gestured to the Mustang. "The car still needs finishing, unless you'd prefer someone more corporate." Claire's laugh held genuine relief. "God, no. This is the only place I can take off the CEO mask." She moved closer, her voice softening. "The only person who sees the real me." The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Tommy, sensing the shift, quietly slipped out to check inventory. "You know," Jack said carefully, "Sarah always said people are like engines. The real power isn't in the shiny parts everyone sees. It's in the heart of things, where the real work happens." Claire's eyes glistened. "Smart woman, you're Sarah. She would have liked you." The words surprised him, but he knew they were true. They stood in the familiar comfort of the garage, surrounded by tools and memories and the gentle presence of the Mustang. Outside, the world might know Claire Richardson as a corporate titan, but here she was, just a woman reconnecting with her father's legacy and perhaps finding something new in the process. "So," Jack said finally, "want to help me adjust the timing?" Claire's smile was answer enough. Some things they both knew were worth more than billions. The question of the Mustang's original color had been bothering Jack for days. Under the faded red, he'd spotted traces of something else, a unique shade he couldn't quite place. That morning, as he carefully sanded a small section of the hood, he found it. "Tommy," he called, "bring me the light." Under the bright inspection lamp, the original paint chip gleamed, a deep, rich blue with subtle metallic flecks that seemed to dance in the light. "I've never seen anything like it," Tommy mused, leaning in close. "That's because it's custom." Jack carefully preserved the chip, placing it in a small envelope. "Mixed by hand, probably. You don't see craftsmanship like this anymore." The phone rang, but this time it wasn't Claire. It was Thomas Chen. "Jack, Claire told me you found traces of the original paint." His voice carried an unusual urgency. "Would you describe it as midnight blue with gold metallic flakes?" "That's exactly what it is. How did you—" "I'm bringing something to the garage. Claire should be there too." An hour later, both Thomas and Claire stood in the garage as Jack showed them the paint chip. Thomas reached into an old leather briefcase and withdrew a weathered racing jacket. The color was an exact match. "Daddy's jacket," Claire whispered, touching it reverently. "From his racing days. James wore this the day he won his first professional race," Thomas explained. "When Claire started racing, he had the Mustang painted to match. Said if she was going to carry on his legacy, she should wear his colors." Jack watched Claire's fingers trace the jacket's worn collar. "We can match it," he said softly. "Bring her back to her original glory." Claire looked up, eyes bright. "You could do that." "It won't be easy," Jack admitted. "Custom colors never are. But I know someone, an old-school paint mixer who studied under the masters. If anyone can recreate it, he can." Thomas smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. James would have appreciated that level of dedication. They spent the next hour sharing stories, Thomas and Claire telling tales of James Richardson's racing days, Jack offering insights from decades of restoration work. The jacket lay across the Mustang's hood, its color a promise of what would come. "You know," Claire said during a lull, "I never told anyone why I really left racing." She smoothed the jacket with trembling hands. "Everyone assumed it was rebellion. The daughter rejecting her father's world for the corporate life. But it wasn't," Jack said quietly, seeing the truth in her eyes. "No, I left because I was afraid of disappointing him. He was a legend in racing circles. How could I ever live up to that?" "So you built an empire instead," Thomas added gently. Claire laughed softly. "Seemed easier somehow. At least there. I wasn't competing with his ghost." Jack thought about the letter they'd found, about the young woman determined to prove herself. "You weren't competing," he said. "You were building on his foundation, just like he taught you with engines. Start with something solid, then make it your own." The afternoon light filtered through the garage windows, catching the metallic flecks in the paint chip, making them shimmer like memories coming to life. "Claire," Thomas said suddenly, "there's something else you should know." He reached into his briefcase again, withdrawing a folder. "Your father kept records of every race you won, every single one. He was there, you know, watching from the crowd. He never missed a race." Claire's hands shook as she opened the folder, finding newspaper clippings, race tickets, hidden photos of her crossing finish lines. "He knew? Of course he knew. He was so proud of you, both on and off the track. He used to say you had his skill but your mother's business sense, an unbeatable combination." Jack stepped back, giving them space with their memories, but Claire caught his arm. "Stay," she said softly. "You're part of this story now too." The three of them sat in the garage, surrounded by tools and memories, sharing stories as the day faded. The paint chip and the jacket remained on the Mustang's hood, two pieces of the past coming together to point the way toward the future. That evening, after Claire and Thomas left, Jack carefully stored both items in his office safe. Tomorrow, they would begin the painstaking process of recreating that perfect color. But tonight, he sat in the quiet garage, thinking about fathers and daughters, about legacy and love, and about how sometimes the most important restorations had nothing to do with paint or chrome. The local paper's headline read, "Billionaire CEO's Secret Project at Miller's Garage." Tommy tossed it on the workbench with an apologetic shrug. "Sorry, Mr. Miller. News travels fast." Jack barely glanced at the article. He was more interested in what Claire had just brought in, a tarnished silver trophy, its engraving still visible, Michigan Amateur Racing Circuit, 1969, first place, J. Richardson. "Found it in storage," Claire explained, setting it carefully on the workbench. "Thought it belonged here with her." The trophy's presence changed the garage's atmosphere. Like the dog tags and the jacket, it carried the weight of history, of victories earned and secrets kept. "First race I ever won," Claire said, running a finger along the trophy's worn surface. "Daddy was in Hong Kong on business, or so I thought. But he was there," Jack finished, remembering Thomas's revelation, "in the crowd, watching his daughter prove herself without even knowing he knew." She smiled at the memory. "I drove home that night feeling like I could conquer the world. And then you did," Tommy chimed in, then blushed. "I mean, with your company and all." Claire laughed, a genuine sound that echoed through the garage. "Different kind of conquest, but yes. Though sometimes I miss the simplicity of those days. Just me, the car, and the track." As if on cue, the Mustang's newly rebuilt engine turned over, its deep rumble filling the space. Jack had been testing the timing, and the sound drew them, all to the car like a magnet. "She remembers," Claire whispered, placing a hand on the warm hood. The moment was interrupted by the diner's delivery boy, bringing their usual lunch order. But today he carried an extra bag. "Mary said to give this to Miss Richardson," he explained, wide-eyed at the celebrity in their midst, "on the house." Inside was Mary's famous apple pie, the same kind she'd been serving racers and mechanics for 40 years. The gesture brought tears to Claire's eyes. "Stay," Jack said, pulling up an extra chair. "Share it with us." And so, Billionaire CEO Claire Richardson found herself eating diner pie off a paper plate in a small-town garage, sharing stories of race days and restoration projects. Tommy hung on every word, especially when Claire described the technical details of her father's racing modifications. "You really know your stuff," he said admiringly. "Daddy made sure of that. Said if I was going to race, I had to understand every inch of what I was driving." She glanced at Jack. "Like someone else I know, who believes in doing things right." The afternoon passed in a comfortable rhythm of work and conversation. Jack showed Claire the progress they'd made on matching her father's custom paint color. She offered insights into the car's quirks that only a driver would know. The slight pull to the left at high speeds, she mentioned. Everyone thought it was a problem, but it was intentional. Helped with the turn-in at our local track. Jack nodded, adding it to his mental restoration notes. Every detail mattered. especially the ones that told the car's unique story. As the day wound down, Claire reluctantly prepared to leave for a board meeting in Detroit. But before going, she placed the trophy in a prominent spot near the Mustang. "For inspiration," she said. Then, more hesitantly, "I'm having dinner at the Golden Oak tomorrow night. They say it's the best restaurant in town." Jack felt Tommy's eager eyes on him. "They do make a good steak," he offered. Would you like to join me? Help me verify their reputation?" The invitation hung in the air, weighted with possibility. Jack thought of Sarah, of quiet dinners and shared dreams, of taking chances on new chapters. "I'd like that," he said simply. After Claire left, Tommy tried and failed to hide his grin. "The Golden Oak, huh? Fancy?" "It's just dinner," Jack muttered, but they both knew it was more than that. The trophy caught the evening light, its tarnished surface gleaming with promise. Tomorrow would bring new developments, but tonight the garage held its secrets close, the stories of victories past and victories yet to come, of hearts as carefully restored as the classics they cherished. The morning of his dinner with Claire, Jack found himself in the attic of his house, drawn to a box he hadn't opened since Sarah's passing. Inside, beneath carefully preserved memories, lay her last Valentine's card to him. The paper was still, crisp, her handwriting clear and strong, belying how weak she'd been when she wrote it. "My dearest Jack," it read, "love isn't a finite resource. It grows, changes, finds new ways to surprise us. Promise me you won't lock your heart in the garage. With the classics, some things are meant to drive on. All my love, always, Sarah." He sat there in the dusty attic light, reading and rereading those words. Sarah had known him so well, known he'd need permission to move forward, to feel joy again. The phone's ring startled him. "Claire, I have to cancel dinner," she said, her voice tight with tension. "The board is challenging my leadership. They're saying my recent distractions show I'm losing focus." Jack's heart sank, but he understood the corporate world's demands. "The restoration, among other things." She paused. "They've been tracking my visits to Miller's Bend. Apparently a CEO shouldn't spend so much time in a small-town garage." The words stung, though he knew they weren't hers. "They might have a point. Don't you dare," Claire's voice sharpened. "This restoration, this garage, it's the most real thing in my life right now." Tommy arrived as Jack was hanging up, immediately sensing something was wrong. "Everything okay?" "Corporate politics," Jack said simply, tucking Sarah's card into his shirt pocket. They worked in silence for a while, but Tommy couldn't contain himself for long. "You know what my mum says about corporate types? I'm sure I'm about to find out. She says they forget that life happens in moments, not quarterly reports." Jack looked at his young apprentice, wondering when he'd gotten so wise. "Your mother should write a book. That's what I keep telling her." Tommy grinned, then sobered. "Ms. Richardson, Claire, she hasn't forgotten, though. You can see it when she's here. She's real here." The local paper lay on the workbench, its headline now questioning whether the mysterious billionaire's interest in their town was a corporate takeover in disguise. The rumors were spreading, morphing from romantic speculation to something darker. "People talk," Jack muttered, more to himself than Tommy. "People always talk," a new voice said. Claire stood in the doorway, still in her corporate armor, but with determination in her eyes. "Let them." She strode into the garage, straight to the Mustang. "The board can wait. This is more important." "Claire?" "No, Jack. Listen." She pulled a folder from her briefcase. "These are the minutes from my first board meeting." "Know what?" "They said that a woman couldn't run a company this size, that I should sell my father's patents and step aside." She laid the folder next to Sarah's trophy. "I proved them wrong then. I'll prove them wrong now." Jack felt Sarah's card in his pocket, its message seemingly burning through the fabric. "Some things are meant to drive on." "The paint's ready," he said finally. "We can start spraying tomorrow." Claire's smile was worth any amount of corporate disapproval. "I'll be here." Tommy, who had been pretending to organize tools nearby, spoke up. "You know, my mom always says—" "Tommy," Jack interrupted, Why don't you go get us all some coffee? After the young man left, Claire moved closer to Jack. He's right, though, about life happening in moments. Smart family, those Wongs. Jack, her hand found his arm. I'm not going to let the board dictate my life, or my heart. The word hung between them, full of promise and complication. Jack's fingers brushed Sarah's card through his shirt. Some things are meant to drive on. Then I guess, he said softly, we'd better make sure this paint job is perfect. Their eyes met, understanding passing between them. Outside, the world might question their unlikely connection, but here in the garage, surrounded by chrome and memories and possibility, nothing else mattered. The Mustang sat quietly in its bay, its bare metal waiting for its true colors to return. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight had brought clarity, and sometimes that was worth more than any corporate approval. The Mustang gleamed in its new paint, the custom midnight blue with gold flakes, catching every ray of sunlight. After 3 days of painstaking work, it was perfect. Exactly as James Richardson had envisioned it decades ago. Claire stood in the garage doorway, speechless at the transformation. In her hands, she held a small leather pouch that drew Jack's attention. The original keys, she explained, moving closer. Daddy had 3 sets made. One for him, one for me, and one, she hesitated, one for the person he said would someday be worthy of taking care of her. The weight of her words filled the garage. From his workbench, Tommy pretended intense fascination with an old carburetor. Claire placed the pouch on the bench beside Jack. I have a proposition for you. Claire, let me finish. She took a deep breath. I'm expanding Richardson Enterprises, opening a classic car division, focusing on preservation and restoration of significant vehicles. I want you to run it. The offer hung in the air like summer heat. Jack looked at the keys, then at the Mustang, his most perfect restoration yet. You'd have complete control, Claire continued. State-of-the-art facilities, unlimited resources. Tommy could come too, start a proper apprenticeship program. Tommy's wrench clattered to the floor, but neither Jack nor Claire looked his way. My whole life is here, Jack said quietly. I know. That's why. Claire squared her shoulders, the CEO momentarily visible beneath the car enthusiast. That's why I'm proposing to build the facility here, in Miller's Bend. Jack's heart skipped. Here? The old Wilson factory site. It's perfect. Enough space for a world-class restoration facility, plus a museum for significant vehicles. We could preserve not just cars, but their stories, their history. The vision was compelling. Jack could see it. A place where craft and history merged, where young mechanics like Tommy could learn from masters, where stories like Claire's and her father's could live on. But then he looked around his garage, at Sarah's pegboard, at the worn floors marked by decades of work, at the memories soaked into every surface. I'd want to keep this place, he said finally, just as it is. Of course, Claire's voice softened. This is where it all started, where I found my way back to who I really am. She reached for the pouch, withdrawing 3 keys, all original, all worn with history. Daddy believed every car had a soulmate, someone who could see past the rust and dents to what it could be again. She held out the 3rd key. He was right. Jack took the key, its weight familiar, yet new. Like Sarah's card in his pocket, it felt like permission, like possibility. The board won't like it, he said. Claire smiled. The board works for me, not the other way around. Besides, they can't argue with the publicity. Richardson Enterprises brings jobs, preserves American automotive heritage. They'll love it once they see the numbers. Tommy finally abandoned his pretense of disinterest. Mr. Miller, this is huge. It was huge, life-changing huge. The kind of opportunity that came once in a lifetime, if at all. I need time, Jack said, to think it through. Claire nodded, understanding in her eyes. Of course. But Jack, she touched his hand, the one holding the key. Some decisions aren't about thinking, they're about feeling what's right. After she left, Tommy helped Jack close up for the night. The Mustang's new paint caught the evening light, its surface like deep water scattered with stars. "Sarah would say go for it," Tommy said quietly. Jack touched the card in his pocket. "I know." The key felt warm in his hand, heavy with promise and possibility. Outside, Miller's Bend was settling into evening routine. Mary's diner lighting. Up for the dinner crowd, old Pete walking his ancient retriever past the garage like clockwork. Change was coming, one way or another. The question was whether he was ready to be not just part of it, but to help shape it. The Mustang seemed to watch him, its restored beauty a testament to what could happen when past and future found their balance. Jack slipped the key onto his ring, next to the garage keys he'd carried for 40 years. Some decisions, as Claire had said, weren't about thinking at all. The morning paper landed on Jack's workbench with a thud that seemed to echo through the garage. The front-page photo showed him and Claire standing close together by the Mustang, her hand on his arm, both of them smiling at something beyond. The camera's view. The headline read, "Romance blooms at Miller's garage. Billionaire CEO finds love in small town." Tommy appeared at his shoulder. Pete's grandson took it, the kid with the photography scholarship. Jack stared at the image. They looked right together, happy. But the publicity made his stomach churn. His phone buzzed. Claire's assistant, not Claire herself. "Mr. Miller, Ms. Richardson requests you turn on Channel 4 News," the small TV in the office, usually tuned to weather. Reports now showed Claire's company headquarters swarmed by reporters. The ticker tape below read, "Richardson Enterprises stock drops amid CEO's small-town romance." "They're saying she's lost focus," Tommy said, reading from his phone. "The board's called an emergency meeting." Jack's hand went to Sarah's card, still in his shirt pocket after all these days. The garage suddenly felt too small, too exposed. The Mustang sat gleaming in its bay, fully restored now except for final detailing. Its midnight blue paint seemed to absorb the morning light, the gold flakes glinting like captured stars. "Maybe," Jack said quietly, "this was all a mistake. Mr. Miller, she's got an empire to run, Tommy. She doesn't need this." He gestured around the garage, at the worn tools and oil-stained floors. The door chimed. Thomas Chen entered, looking grave. "Jack, we need to talk." They sat in Jack's office, the newspaper between them on the desk. Thomas studied the photo for a long moment. "The board's using this to move against her," he said finally. "They've never forgiven her for being James's daughter instead of his son. Now they think they've found their chance. Because of me. Because they're afraid of her humanity." Thomas leaned forward. "They want a CEO who thinks only in profit margins. Claire threatens them because she remembers what really matters." Jack thought about Claire's face when she first saw the restored paint, about her hands touching her father's modifications with such reverence. "She needs to focus on her company," he said, the words tasting like ash. "No," Thomas's voice sharpened. "She needs to be who she really is. James didn't build that company so his daughter could become a corporate robot." The phone rang again. Claire's private line this time. Jack let it go to voicemail. Tommy knocked and entered, holding another paper. Folks in town have something to say." The local gazette's editorial page was filled with letters from Miller's Bend residents. Mary from the diner wrote about Claire eating pie and sharing stories with locals. Pete's grandson explained how she'd funded his photography scholarship anonymously. Others spoke of quiet donations to the community center, of jobs promised, of hope renewed. "She's one of us now," Tommy said simply. "The whole town knows it." Jack read the letters, feeling something shift in his chest. The corporate world might see their relationship as a liability, but here, in the real world, it meant something else entirely. His phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Don't you dare push me away. Not you too." The photo on his desk caught his eye. Him and Sarah on their wedding day, standing proud in front of the newly opened Miller's garage. They'd faced doubt then too, people saying a woman couldn't be a real mechanic, that their dream was too small. Sarah's card seemed to burn in his pocket. Love isn't a finite resource. Thomas, he said slowly, what would James do in this situation? The older man smiled. He'd fire the board, promote the ones who stood by Claire, and probably buy a new car to celebrate. And Claire's her father's daughter. She just needs to be reminded of that. Jack stood, decision made. Tommy, get the Mustang ready. Full detail, everything perfect. Where are we going? Jack picked up the original keys, feeling their weight, to remind a CEO who she really is. Thomas's smile widened. Now that sounds like something James would do. Outside, the summer. Sun painted Miller's Bend in shades of possibility. The town might be small, but its heart was big enough to embrace both a billionaire CEO and a widowed mechanic finding love again. Some stories, Jack realized, were worth any amount of publicity. The Mustang purred to life under Jack's hands, its restored engine singing a perfect note. In the passenger seat, Tommy checked off the final items on their inspection list. She's ready, the young man said softly, almost reverently. Jack nodded, his hands resting on the wheel. Every inch of the car was perfect now, from its custom midnight blue paint to the preserved racing modifications that told Claire and James's story. Even the hidden compartments had been carefully maintained, keeping their secrets intact. The sound of heels on concrete made them both look up. Claire stood in the garage doorway, but not the Claire they'd come to know. This was Claire Richardson, CEO in full corporate armor, tailored suit, perfect hair, expression carefully neutral. The board meeting's in an hour, she said. Jack got out, holding the door open for her. Then we better not be late. She hesitated. Jack, you don't have to. Get in the car, Claire. A smile cracked her professional facade. She slid into the driver's seat, her hands finding their familiar places on the wheel. Jack watched her shoulders relax, the CEO mask slipping away. Remember what you told me about your first race? He asked, leaning on the door. That I was terrified, but thrilled. And what did your father say? Her hands tightened on the wheel. Fear means you're about to do something brave. Tommy appeared with a small package wrapped in brown paper. Found this in the trunk compartment, Ms. Richardson. Think you might need it today. Claire unwrapped her father's racing jacket, the color perfectly matching the car's new paint. Her eyes glistened as she slipped it on over her suit. The board wants quarterly projections, Jack said. Show them something they can't put in a spreadsheet. She turned the key, and the engine's rumble filled the garage. This wasn't just a restored classic anymore. It was a statement, a declaration of who Claire Richardson really was. Tommy, Jack called, hold down the fort. We've got a board meeting to crash. The drive to Richardson Enterprises headquarters took just under an hour. Claire handled the Mustang like she'd never left the driver's seat, every shift perfect, every turn precise. Jack watched her transform with each mile, corporate anxiety falling away, replaced by the confidence of a woman who'd once ruled the local racing circuit. They pulled into the corporate parking lot, the Mustang's engine echoing off glass and steel. Employees stopped to stare. Security guards stepped forward, then recognized their CEO and stepped back, confused by her appearance, racing jacket over business suit, victory in her eyes. Ready? Jack asked. Claire touched the jacket's sleeve, then reached for his hand. Now I am. The boardroom fell silent as they entered. 12 men and women in expensive suits stared at their CEO, at her unlikely companion, at the racing jacket that seemed to glow under the fluorescent lights. Lady and gentlemen, Claire said, her voice carrying her father's steel, before we discuss quarterly projections, I'd like to show you something. She led them to the window. 20 stories below, the Mustang sat in the sun, its midnight blue, paint making every other car in the lot look mass-produced and soulless. That car, Claire continued, represents everything Richardson Enterprises stands for. Precision, innovation, the courage to modify what exists and imagine what could be. She turned to face them, and Jack saw James Richardson's daughter in full force. My father built this company the same way he built that car, with vision, with passion, and with the understanding that true value isn't just about numbers. She laid out her plans for the restoration facility, for preserving automotive history, for bringing jobs and pride back to Miller's Bend. The board members leaned forward despite themselves, caught up in her passion. "And yes," she finished, "I fell in love with a small town, with a vision of what we could build there, and with a man who sees past surface shine to what really matters." Jack stood quietly by the door, watching Claire command the room. This was her race to win, and she was crossing the finish line in style. Hours later, they drove back to Miller's Bend in comfortable silence. The board had voted unanimously to support Claire's plans. Sometimes, Jack realized, you had to remind people that the best stories couldn't be contained in balance sheets. The Mustang carried them home, its engine singing a song of victory and possibility. In its restored glory, it had become more than just a car. It was a bridge between worlds, between past and future, between a CEO and a small-town mechanic who had found each other while bringing a classic back to life. Early morning sunlight glinted off the new sign above the garage. Miller and Richardson Classic Restorations. The ampersand curved like a road connecting two destinations, just as Tommy had insisted when he helped design it. Jack stood across the street, coffee in hand, studying how the old and new elements merged. The original Miller's lettering style remained, but now it shared space with Richardson in complementary script. Below, in smaller text, "Preserving stories, restoring classics." "Having second thoughts?" Claire asked, appearing at his side. "About the sign? No," he smiled. "About letting Tommy design it? Maybe." But they both knew the young man had gotten it exactly right. The sign represented everything they'd built together, a bridge between Claire's corporate world and Jack's. Small-town craftsmanship. The old Wilson factory site buzzed with construction activity. The new restoration facility was taking shape, its modern lines somehow fitting naturally into Miller's Bend's landscape. Local contractors had been hired for every aspect of the build, breathing new life into the town's economy. "Mr. Chen called," Claire said, using Thomas's formal name as she did when discussing business. "The first batch of apprentices starts next month. 20 young people, all from small towns like this one." Jack nodded, pride warming his chest. Tommy had helped design the apprenticeship program, insisting it focus not just on technical skills, but on the stories behind the classics they'd be restoring. Inside the garage, those stories were already accumulating. Claire's father's racing trophy sat beside old photos of Jack and Sarah. The Mustang's original keys hung next to the garage's first dollar bill. Each item represented a chapter in their combined history. Mary from the diner stuck her head in the door. "Thought you folks might need breakfast." She carried a tray of coffee and her famous cinnamon rolls. "Big day today, what with the newspaper coming and all." The local paper was doing a feature on the garage's transformation and its impact on the community. But more than that, they wanted to tell the story of how a classic car had brought together two people from different worlds. "Jack?" Tommy called from inside. "That '57 Chevy just arrived, the one with the custom manifold, yeah." Jack turned to Claire. "Want to help diagnose it?" Her eyes lit up. Despite her CEO duties, she still spent every free moment in the garage, hands dirty, learning and teaching in equal measure. The Chevy's owner, an elderly woman named Dorothy, watched in amazement as billionaire Claire Richardson lay on a creeper and rolled under her car, pointing out modifications to Jack. "My Harold would have loved this place," Dorothy said, wiping away a tear. "He always said cars had souls." "They do," Claire replied, emerging with a grease smudge on her cheek. "And so do their stories." Jack watched Claire explain the Chevy's unique features to Dorothy, her passion evident in every word. In these moments, the corporate world felt very far away. The construction sounds from the new facility mingled with the familiar noises of the garage, tools clanking, engines turning over, Tommy humming as he organized parts. The old and new rhythms blended perfectly, like the words on their sign. Later, as they prepared for the newspaper interview, Jack found Claire in the office, looking at Sarah's photograph. "I wish I could have known her," Claire said softly. "You'd have gotten along," Jack smiled. "She'd have loved what we're building here. A garage, a legacy, a place where stories don't get lost." Claire touched the racing jacket she now kept hung beside Sarah's old coveralls. "Daddy would have loved it too." Outside, Tommy was already talking to the newspaper reporter, gesturing enthusiastically at the sign. The young man had become the bridge between generations, carrying forward the best of both worlds. The garage doors stood open to the morning light, welcoming whatever stories might drive in next. On Jack's desk, Sarah's Valentine's card sat, in a frame next to the photo from the local paper that had once caused such turmoil. "Love isn't a finite resource," Sarah had written, and she had been right, as always. The garage hosted weddings better than any church, Tommy had insisted. The tools and classic cars served as witnesses, while Jack and Claire exchanged vows beneath the new sign, their joined names already united in metal above them. On a small table beside them, 2 wedding photos stood side by side, Jack and Sarah on their day 40 years ago, and James and Eleanor Richardson on theirs. The past seemed to smile on the present, as Claire, wearing her father's racing jacket, over a simple white dress, took Jack's hand. "Who gives this woman?" the minister asked. "She gives herself," Claire answered firmly, "but she brings with her the love of those who came before." Thomas Chen stepped forward, carrying a small wooden box. Inside lay 3 items: Sarah's red-handled wrench, James's dog tags, and the original keys to the Mustang. "Something old," Thomas said, his voice carrying through the garage, "from those who taught us about love and craft." He handed the items to Tommy, who stood proudly as best man. The Mustang gleamed in its bay, now a permanent display piece in what would become the garage's museum section. Its midnight blue paint caught the afternoon light, the gold flakes dancing like captured stars. "The things we restore," Jack said in his vows, "are more than metal and chrome. They're vessels for memories, carriers of stories. Claire, you drove into my life in a car that needed restoration, but you helped restore my heart instead." Claire squeezed his hands, her CEO composure softening. "In corporate meetings, they talk about synergy, when 2 entities combine to create something greater than their parts. But it took a small-town garage to show me what that really means." Tommy stepped forward with the rings, simple bands that echoed the curves of classic car designs. As Jack slipped Claire's ring on her finger, it clinked gently against the wrench she still wore on a chain around her neck. Mary from the diner cried openly in the front row. Pete's grandson photographed everything, capturing the moment the past and present merged into a future none of them could have imagined. "By the power vested in me," the minister smiled, "and by the spirit of craft and care that fills this place, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Their kiss was accompanied by the sound of Tommy revving the Mustang's engine, a automotive approval that made everyone laugh. The reception spread through the garage and into the newly completed restoration facility next door. Corporate executives mingled with local mechanics, sharing stories of cars and dreams. Claire's board members, now fully converted to her vision, traded tips with Tommy's first batch of apprentices. As evening fell, Jack found Claire by the Mustang, her hand resting on its fender. "Having regrets?" he asked softly. "Only that Daddy and your Sarah couldn't be here." She smiled, though somehow they are. The photos on the table seemed to glow in the evening light. 4 people who had loved deeply, whose stories had somehow led to this moment. Thomas appeared with champagne. "James always said the right car brings the right people together. And Sarah always said love finds its own timing," Jack added. They toasted quietly, the 3 of them standing beside the car that had started it all. Through the open garage doors, they could see Miller's Bend stretching out before them, its streets now busy with new life and purpose. Tommy joined them, careful with his own champagne glass. "You know what my mom says about moments like this? "What's that, kid?" Jack asked, though they all knew Tommy's mother's wisdom had proven true more often than not. She says sometimes, "The best restoration work happens on hearts, not just cars." Claire leaned into Jack's embrace, her racing jacket soft against his suit. Above them, the new sign caught the last rays of sunset, the ampersand glowing like a path between worlds. The wedding photos watched over it all. Two loves, two stories, now joined in a continuing journey. The garage held these memories close, adding them to its collection of tales about restoration, revival, and the endless possibilities of love. 1 year later, the flatbed truck arrived early morning, carrying what looked like more rust than car. Tommy supervised its unloading, his clipboard forgotten as he circled the 1957 Thunderbird with growing excitement. "Found it in a barn in Wisconsin," Claire explained as Jack joined them. "The owner said it hadn't run since '73. Jack ran his hand along the car's weathered surface, reading its history in dents and scratches. "It's perfect." The garage, still housed in the original building despite the state-of-the-art facility, next door, had become a sanctuary of sorts. Here, Jack and Claire worked on special projects themselves, leaving the larger restoration business to Tommy's capable management. "The apprentices are asking if they can observe the restoration," Tommy said, trying to sound professional despite his obvious enthusiasm. "For educational purposes, of course." "Of course," Claire smiled, knowing they really wanted to watch the CEO and the master mechanic work together. Their restoration of the Mustang had become something of a legend among the students. The Mustang itself held pride of place in the museum section, surrounded by photographs and artifacts that told not just its story, but the story of everyone it had brought together. Visitors often commented on how it seemed to glow with an inner light, especially when the afternoon sun hit its midnight blue paint. "So," Jack said, opening the Thunderbird's hood, "ready to start another story." Claire slipped off her business jacket, revealing the coveralls underneath. Her board had long since learned that their CEO was most herself, with grease on her hands and a wrench in her grip. They worked in comfortable silence, occasionally trading tools or observations. Through the open doors, they could hear Tommy, teaching a class in the new facility, his voice confident as he explained the importance of preserving a car's history along with its mechanics. "Found something?" Claire called, reaching into the Thunderbird's glove compartment. She withdrew a faded photograph, a young couple on their wedding day, the car gleaming behind them. June 12, 1957. Jack smiled, thinking of their own wedding. Photo now hanging in the garage's gallery of memories. Some traditions carried on, generation after generation. As the day wound down, Mary's granddaughter arrived with dinner. She'd taken over the diner's delivery runs, keeping another tradition alive. The three of them sat in the office, sharing food and stories, while the Thunderbird waited patiently for its revival. "You know what Mom always says about old cars?" Tommy asked, unable to resist. "What's that?" Claire and Jack responded in unison, sharing a knowing look. "She says they're like love stories. Sometimes they need a little restoration, but the classics never go out of style." Outside, Miller's Bend hummed with new energy. The restoration facility had brought jobs, students, and purpose to the town. But here in the original garage, surrounded by tools and memories and the gentle presence of those who had come before, time moved at its own pace. Jack reached for Claire's hand, feeling the wrench calluses that matched his own. Sarah's Valentine's card still sat framed on his desk, but now it shared space with new memories, photos of apprentice graduations, community celebrations, quiet moments between a mechanic and a CEO who had found each other while bringing a classic back to life. The Thunderbird would be their next story, one told in chrome and steel, in shared work and quiet understanding. But the real restoration had already happened, in a small-town garage where two hearts had learned that love, like classic cars, only grows more valuable with time. As evening settled over Miller's Bend, the lights of the garage glowed warm and welcoming. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new restorations, new stories to preserve. But tonight, in the peaceful company of weathered tools and aged wood, past and present rested together in perfect harmony. Tommy left last, pausing to pat the Thunderbird's fender. "Welcome to the family," he murmured, before heading out to his own restoration project at home. Jack and Claire stood in the doorway, watching the sun set behind the town their love had helped revive. Above them, the sign caught the last light, Miller and Richardson Classic Restorations. Two names, two legacies, united in the craft of bringing beauty back to the world. Some things, they had learned, were better than new. Some things grew more precious with each passing year, each careful restoration, each story preserved and passed along. Just like love,